Your remarks about the questions and how important they are reminded me also of a recent forum that I attended called the Leadership Business Forum in Lincoln Center in New York City.
Yeah.
Huge theater, as you know, right? And Hal Gregersen, who was the director of the MIT Innovation Center, was the speaker. And he was promoting his new book, Questions Are the Answer. But what struck me about that whole dynamic that he created very quickly and very successfully was that he asked everyone in this room, right, in this theater, about 2,000 people, to partner up with their neighbor in the next seat and just tell each other, take turns and tell each other about a problem that they're facing. Have the other person listen for a minute and then just write down questions without any answers. Just write down question after question, like just set of questions, and then present those questions to the person. And then they took turns. And I found it like it was extremely interactive, and he was able to just connect such a large group of people in such a huge room.
Right.
So, so question, and I'm using that actually, Jerry, in some of my coaching with my private clients as well, with people who I mentor.
The terrific idea, because, too often, especially, people in the persuasion business, they ask a question, and as soon as the customer answers, they want to respond.
Yeah.
When they really haven't identified what did the person mean by what they said. Mm-hmm. Usually you got to dig to really find out what's at the sort of bottom of this issue. And that's why this exercise, I think, was so powerful. Because, you can make an instantaneous diagnosis and be wrong about 95% of the time. But if you dig deeper and try and find out, okay, what else is really going on here? But one of the things that's fascinating is that I think the studies show that we start losing our curiosity at a very early age. Children are curious as heck. Mama, what's this? Mama, what's that? Daddy, what's this? Daddy, what's that? By the time you're a teen, you lost your curiosity. The truth is, if you're going to be a great leader, you need to re-energize your curiosity. Try and understand, exactly why people do what they do, because there's a reason why they do what they do. And if you really understand that reason, then you got a better shot at trying to deal with it, or understanding that you can't deal with it.
Yeah. What would you say the current generation of leaders is doing better, or what could they learn from previous generations of leaders?
Well, first place, the current generation of leaders, I think, certainly are much more technologically savvy than we are. And I think that gives them an edge. I think they think differently than we do, because technology has been such an important part of their life. I think that it's like everything else. Your strength is also often your Achilles heel, and so what comes with that is an over reliance on technology. When in reality, there's nothing probably more powerful than a live interaction like we're having. I think they're more social conscious than we were, and not to say that we weren't, but I think it's a because of, I think, all of the changes in the demographics of our society, that they're more socially conscious, and I think that's a good thing. I think another thing is that I think they're really smart. They're really smart. You got more college educated kids in the younger generation than you do in our generation. And so you got a bunch of really smart people, and I think they are intellectually motivated to learn more, and they are not opposed to learning from people with significantly different ages and more experience than them, which I find very compelling. The younger people that I've hired, who have reached leadership position. One of the people that mentors me is a guy who's an expert in culture. His name is Jay Duran, and he's way too smart for me. I listen to him and I say, okay, I'm probably getting about 15% of this stuff because Jay is so dang smart. But he's also a person who is dying to learn from people with more experience than him, and so I think that there's gigantic hope for America, because I do believe that if you take a lot of really smart people who have a significant degree of curiosity and a desire to learn, which I think the vast majority of people who ascend to leadership in this newer generation do, I think what it will create is probably the most successful economy that this country has ever seen over the next 5 or 10 years, assuming that they're not, and sort of messed up by the government, which they have a tendency to do that from time to time. But this is a group of people who will figure out ways to marry technology with good ideas. Now, it'll create problems too, because the acceleration of the change that these people envision will make things that might have been, obsolescent in 10 years, they'll be obsolescent in 3. Mm-hmm. And so, and you're already seeing that.
Yeah. The pace is just.
I mean, for me, it's an incredibly encouraging thing when I meet these young people that are the new, generation of leaders. And when I meet them, they are, and I go, I teach at a college twice a year. Last year I taught also at the Batten School of Leadership at the University of Virginia. And I like teaching in schools that I couldn't get into. And I could never have gotten into UVA. And I've taught at Dartmouth. Couldn't have gotten in there either. But I am incredibly energized by the people that I'm surrounded by. They're people with incredible achievement drive, incredible energy. They're not afraid to question. They're not afraid to challenge, but they're eager to learn. And so I think they're probably freer than we were, because we all grew up in this sort of military-like hierarchical society where, you did what you were told.
Do you think, though, that they're a little bit impatient, more impatient than previous generations?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because I think fast food started that. Now if you can't get it in 13 seconds, I mean, at the internet, my God, the internet's slow. It's taking me 14 seconds to get, Google to download, a search. Oh, there's no question it makes them impatient. Mm-hmm. But I think the smart ones mature, start maturing in their late 20s and early 30s, and they start understanding that people skills really matter, and patience really matters, and learning from others really matters. And when you get that combination, you've got somebody who's going to be wildly successful, way younger than I was when I was successful.
Yeah, that's a great outlook for the future. How do you think the medical affairs or pharmaceutical industry will transform in the next 5 years? If you could make a prediction, do you see it's going to be radically different than today?
Well, I think the big differences is there'll be less focus on primary care, more focus on rare disease and oncology, and the specialties, and because I think that's where the research dollars are going, for lack of a term, the unmet. I mean, look, HDL and LDL, we got those covered, right? I mean, right. If you're taking 20 milligrams of rosuvastatin like I am, you ain't got any LDL problems, right? And I don't think we're going to find, anything that's a heck of a lot better than that. And I think pharma companies understand that. I think what they realize is that there's still some diseases that need to be conquered. Alzheimer's is one of them. Now, we had an Alzheimer's drug 25 years ago, and I came to the conclusion then, this is God's way of telling you ain't getting out of here alive. And I think cancer is probably the same way. Mm-hmm. But so I think it's more specialty. I think you're going to have more sales reps who perform like an MSL. My belief is, and I've always believed this, the very best reps I've ever worked with had the knowledge, acumen about their product in a therapeutic category that a good MSL did. Maybe not equal, but dadgum close. And your best MSLs were people who also understood the power of sharing their beliefs, not selling anything, because MSLs should never sell. But all MSLs should do is share what they believe and what they know about the product, but getting really good at that by asking good questions, being curious with the customer is a skill that many of the great reps have learned. And so, but I always thought, honestly, when back when Merck bought the PBM, or I forget when it was like 20. It was back in the early 90s, right? Mm-hmm. I actually thought what Merck figured out was that you didn't need sales reps anymore. that what you could do is you could put a whole bunch of MSLs in a building and have them contact your customers, and your customers would find that more compelling. So I think the role of MSLs, which I think is a little sad because I think you're seeing fewer MSLs today than you did before, but I think a lot of that is because there's less emphasis on primary care and there's not as much need. But I still think that the MSL role may be the most important role in pharma from a commercial point of view, even though they're not commercial, they're in the medical affairs group, but because they are the answer to many questions that sales reps can't answer, but they can answer because they have, exquisite knowledge and understanding of the data, and they know the appropriate use of the drug. And I think that, having that knowledge is, I don't know. I think it's invaluable.
Yeah, Jerry, when I mentor early career MSLs, those who are trying to become MSLs, I tell them how important it is to have a very close relationship with their field commercial organization, because I just explained to them that we often forget, unfortunately, that both the sales, the field sales, and the field medical or MSLs are ultimately partners in the continuum of care and the continuum of patient access to medication and providers access to the right medication to patients. I often consider MSLs as being somewhat of drums, in that song of science, and, if you will, and the sales reps as kind of the vocalists who everyone knows about. And I think that, medical affairs could assume more responsibilities and more leadership in the future, in the next 5 years, in turning around the trust, the perception that the public has for our industry as well. And I'm hopeful that can happen, in the future.
Well, listen, I've worked with lots of MSL groups. One of the things that's funny is, an MSL in my mind has to have the right belief about what they do. Mm-hmm. So now I've never been an MSL, but I've done lots of work with them. And what I tell them is that, look, first place I ask them, what do you think your job is? Now, too often the answer is disseminate information. Mm-hmm. And I say, you do know we could do that with a postcard.
Yeah.
And so that's not your job.
And nowadays with technology, that becomes pretty easy, right? To disseminate data.
Yeah, but I said, my belief is that your job is to share what you believe, what you personally believe about the product based on everything that you've learned. And if you simply share what you believe, the customer can believe it or not. It doesn't matter. It's what you believe based on all the studying that you've done and all the education that you've had about, where this product makes sense, where it doesn't make sense. I used to spend a lot of time when I was, a district manager telling physicians where not to use my product. And when I teach people that now, and I do it in every presentation I give to a client, tell the customer where not to use the product. Tell the customer where the adverse reactions are. Tell them that if potentially you're going to get O&J, tell them how they actually counsel that patient, or how don't select that patient. I want to make sure that they know everything, because I want them to only give this to the people that ought to be on the drug. And the answer to that is usually what's in the label, or what the physician believes is not in the label, but they feel is an okay practice, which happens probably more in oncology than it does anywhere else.
Some of my best customers and my biggest accomplishments on the medical side, I owe to this day, Jerry, to a lot of those great personal relationship minded kind of reps that inspired me, back in the day when I was at AstraZeneca, when I started out, Jerry. So,
but when I was running a company, I had a hospital in Pittsburgh call me, big hospital, tell me that neurosurgeons were using our product for surgical prophylaxis, and our product was a third generation cephalosporin, and of course, the standard of care in that kind of surgery is the first generation. Mm-hmm. And so the pharmacist, who was a friend of mine, he called me, he said, how do I stop this? And I said, is there any way you can get all of your neurosurgeons in a room at one time? He said, yeah. I said, well, then I'll fly over there and ask them not to use the product. I mean, I run the company. I'm the one who's responsible for the P&L. I'll tell you now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you, I consulted with our medical affairs people because I really wanted to understand whether this was an appropriate use of our product or not. My medical people tell me, and I run the company, that this is not. what we would believe is that what standard of care is the first generation cephalosporin. So I'm coming here today to ask you, please don't use my product that way. Yeah. That's how strongly I believed in appropriate care.